July 1st, 1999. The world is buzzing about the new millennium. The dot-com bubble is nearing its peak and the euro had just been introduced. But in Japan, a quiet revolution was starting to take place. A revolution that would change the landscape of global finance in ways no one could have predicted.
We've made what she says is millions of dollars trading currencies.
In homes across the country, a group of ordinary housewives in Japan began to venture into a world ruled by Wall Street tycoons and international banking giants. We call them the Mrs. Watanabe.
Mrs. Watanabe.
Motivated by a desire to protect their families, armed with nothing more than personal computers and an unyielding resolve, the Mrs. Watanabes shook the global financial markets from their kitchen tables. Forever. Imagine if we could go back in time to the late 1980s. Japan's economy was booming. Its economy was so strong, it was second only to the colossal United States. This was especially true in the world of real estate and the stock market, where prices were sky high. But, as the saying goes, what goes up must come down. When the 1990s rolled in, Japan's economic bubble popped. The country's real estate and stock markets collapsed, wiping out trillions of yen in wealth almost overnight. Suddenly, the economic powerhouse was brought to its knees, and this crisis marked the start of what is now known as Japan's lost decade. In an effort to get the economy back on track, the Bank of Japan decided to lower interest rates. Interest rates are the price you pay to borrow money. When they're high, it costs a lot to borrow, so people and businesses decide to save their money instead. When they're low, it's cheaper to borrow, encouraging people and businesses to spend and stimulate the economy. But even with these low interest rates, the Japanese economy was still struggling and regular people weren't getting much return on their savings in Japanese banks. It was during these tough times that something unexpected started to happen. In Tokyo, a city that never sleeps, a surprising force was on the rise. Not in the fancy offices full of businessmen, but in the homes of ordinary people. Mrs. Watanabe. But who exactly is Mrs. Watanabe? Well, she doesn't really exist. Not as a single person, at least. In Japan, Mrs. Watanabe is like John Doe or Average Joe in English. It's the fifth most common surname in Japan and is used to represent an everyday person. In this case, the average Japanese housewife. Women are in charge of household finances in Japanese society, so they noticed the low growth of their savings in Japanese banks. Looking for better options, they started to explore beyond Japan. Their search led them to the fast-paced world of foreign exchange, or forex trading, where they could trade different currencies and potentially make a profit. Over 1 million of these women began speculating in financial markets to increase their family savings, leading to the emergence of the Mrs. Watanabe movement. But little did they know what would happen next. Now, imagine you're a Japanese housewife. You're in charge of the household finances, and you've got money to invest. But when you look around, there are no attractive options at home. The interest rates are so low that leaving your money in a savings account feels like letting it gather dust. It's not getting your savings anywhere. This is where Mrs. Watanabe found herself. Her savings were growing too slowly in Japan's banks, so she decided to do something innovative. She thought, why not borrow money here in Japan where it's cheap, then lend it out in a country where I can get higher interest? This idea is what we call the carry trade, and that's precisely what Mrs. Watanabe did. In a carry trade, you borrow money in a currency with a low interest rate, like the yen, then use that money to invest in a different currency that offers a higher interest rate, like the Australian dollar. You get to pocket the difference of the interest you get from your deposit in the foreign bank. Imagine living in a country where fruits are currency. For every 100 apples you deposit in the Apple City Bank, they reward you with 1 extra apple each year. But then, you spot that the Orange City Bank gives out 5 extra oranges annually for every 100 oranges deposited. So you decide to swap your apples for oranges, pocketing those extra oranges each year. So she borrowed Japanese yen at low interest and changed them into a currency where the interest was high so she could earn more. The difference in interest rates was her profit. And just like that, Mrs. Watanabe found herself at the center of a financial revolution right from her kitchen table. This marked the birth of the Mrs. Watanabe carry trade phenomenon, a savvy financial maneuver that would soon attract global attention. Mrs. Watanabe has been living the good life with the money from the carry trade. And this wasn't just a few people. The word spread, and soon after, thousands of Mrs. Watanabe across Japan were doing the same thing. The carry trade was the hottest ticket in town, and it seemed like these good times would never end. According to the Financial Times, more than half of Japanese household assets are cash and bank deposits. This is unusually high since cash only represents 14% of Americans' household assets, and 37% of Europeans. But there's no such thing as zero-risk profits. Just like the highest swing in the playground can give you the best ride, it can also be the scariest when things go wrong. In 1998, a storm hit the global financial market. A storm called the Russian financial crisis. Russia defaulted on its debts and created a massive earthquake for the entire global financial system. Remember the carry trade? Well, here's the downside of it. If the yen's value rises against the currency Mrs. Watanabe has put her money into, repaying the borrowed yen would lead to losses. And to the chagrin of Mrs. Watanabe, that's precisely what happened. When the Russian financial crisis hit, investors got scared. They rushed to pull their money out of risky investments and put it in safer places. One of those safer places was the Japanese yen. As more and more people bought yen, its value went up. Her winning lottery ticket turned into a ticking time bomb. As the yen surged in value, it was more expensive for her to repay what she had borrowed. The Russian crisis turned the tables. She suddenly was in the eye of the storm, and her plans for healthy returns were swept away by the unexpected surge in the yen's value. The gap between interest rates shrank. The Russian financial crisis was a chilling reminder that even the best strategies can falter. It was a wake-up call for Mrs. Watanabe and all the other carry traders out there, reminding them that their business was not at all risk-free.